Hello, so this is going to be a camo test during the summer where it's getting quite arid now, so not all the plants are all that green, and I'm going to be using British MTP Camo, which is multi-terrain pattern. So I've started off with this photo so you can easily see what the camouflage looks like with me just stood in front of the tree line fairly close. As you can see, there's a scrim net in the helmet covering my face, which is designed to make it less obvious where my face is in a lot of these pictures. In all the pictures I'm actually looking at the camera in this one rather than having my back turned. Now what I'm going to do is show each picture from various distances. We'll start with the furthest away picture, then we'll get closer so it should become more obvious where I am the closer the pictures get in. And then what I'm going to do is go to the furthest zoomed out picture, and then I'm going to digitally zoom it in, and that should give you an idea of what, how it would be for the person looking, even if they knew where you were, sort of how the camo would blend in. Obviously a lot of this is just in theory, like with a lot of the camouflage tests, because looking at something on a monitor is often quite different from looking at your eye. So anyway, let's get started with these tests. So to start off, here's me standing on the tree line with the MTP camouflage on. Now the first picture in the shade is more like how your actual eye would see it, where the camouflage works well. However, once the camera zooms in and the sort of colour balance is adjusted, it becomes far more obvious to see where I'm standing. If I was actually to wear camouflage like this and hide, I'd be stood behind those leaves there, not in front of them. So the next three pictures are actually me doing just that, and as you'll see I'll be much harder to spot in the consecutive three pictures. So here's the same three pictures but with me actually standing in the tree line. Now of this set of pictures you probably won't spot me until the closest picture. And then even then, zooming in, I had to massively mess with the brightness and contrast settings so I'm even visible. So this is how you're actually meant to be using the camouflage, stood with objects obscuring you and not, stood directly outside where your silhouette is obvious. So you can see me there on the left, and now I'm in the same position but you should only just be able to spot me if the brightness and contrast changed. It should be fairly obvious in these pictures where I am because my silhouette is quite obviously visible because I'm stood in the tree line but not directly in front or behind of a tree. So my silhouette is obviously quite obvious. I'm also casting a bit of a shadow there. However, I think the camouflage pattern itself works fairly well at sort of disguising myself from the objects around me, so it's only really the silhouette that gives it away, but the camo colours are perfect for this sort of environment. Now here's a really effective use of the camouflage. I'm stood in a cluster of trees, so as the photos are taken at closer ranges I should become more obvious where I'm standing. However, the camouflage definitely hides me quite well and makes me look like the shadows surrounding me. Like most camouflage, this definitely works better in shadows than in bright light. And here you can see on the zoomed out and zoomed in picture I do just look like kind of a tree shaped shadow rather than the person. Now here's some just fun photos to demonstrate my Marpat sort of scrim net, or sniper veil as Americans would call it. Now I basically did one set where I just laid on the path, it's quite obvious where I am. This particular net I've got isn't big enough to cover all of me with a helmet on, so it's mostly just covering my head. But it's surprisingly how well it works when you're not actually laying on a path and you're laying on leaves. Now, if I had an even bigger one, obviously it would be more effective, but you can actually see here that the camo pattern on it works very well when you're laying down in sort of leaves and dead grass, and obviously, especially on this last picture, which is the zoomed out one then zoomed in, you're not very obvious at all to somebody just passing by. In these pictures I'm holding a couple of broken branches. Now, what gives me away in these is actually my hands, because I'm not wearing camouflage gloves, or haven't put any sort of paint on my hands. They're a lot more luminous than the rest of the stuff around me. But other than that, this seems to actually work quite well, so good tactic for you, break off branches and hold them. In these pictures I'm stood in front of a tree, which helps to break up my outline, but the tree's not quite big enough to break up all of it. But as you can see, it works a lot more effectively than just standing out in the open. So it's only when you get properly close in that I become obvious, but at a distance you're not all that obvious where you're standing. Now in these pictures I'm stood in front of some broken branches, which does help to hide my silhouette, but then in the next three pictures what I'm going to do is crouch down in this exact same position, and you'll notice as soon as I crouch down and make myself harder to see, I immediately do become harder to see for the obvious reason that the eye has to try and focus through branches and then see the camouflage, and this is when camouflage really works effectively, as you saw earlier on, when there's actually foliage or other things disrupting the camo and then the camo's behind that adding an extra disruptive effect. So overall I think MTP or multi-terrain pattern is a very effective camouflage, just as multi-cam is. But obviously be aware, in a very green forest it wouldn't work very well, and in a purely sort of yellow desert it wouldn't work all that well. The idea is that it works well enough everywhere, and it's specifically very good in arid conditions. But like all camouflages, it does have its pros and cons, and you do know how to wear it and break up your shape effectively. If you stood in the middle of an open field, it wouldn't matter how good a camouflage pattern is, it would do nothing to hide you.